Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pixel Play Podcast, the only podcast banned in 37 fictional countries, including Spira. Adam, aka CSRadical, here with you guys, and you are probably sitting there being like, "Wow, this is a voice we're not accustomed to hearing at the very beginning." That's because the plan has finally gone through. We have rid ourselves of the weak. We have lost. We have shed the weight, and Kaylan is on vacation. If this stream is going up, if this podcast is going up, man, already off to an amazing start here. If this podcast is up, that means I'm running solo, he is on vacation, and he is not able to make our usual recording time. So it is just me on this emergency recorded episode that may or may not actually see the light of day, but if you're hearing it, it made it. It made it through the cracks and is now seeing the sun for the first time. So yeah, it is going to be an interesting show, as it's going to be shorter, obviously. I mean, when you have one less person to talk to, there's not nearly the bounce around that you can do with these conversations. So, I'm going to do my best to at least, try to pad this out to a good 45 minutes. But, if it ends up in the 30-minute range, you know why. There's nobody in this show to tell me that, I'm wrong, even though I'm never wrong. I never say anything on this show that could be considered wrong or a bad take or a little bit, misinterpreted or maybe a little bit over anxious, overzealous. I've never done that at any point on this show. So we'll start today. So we got a few things to talk about, mostly just in relation to stories that we obviously talked about last week. I mean, we'll start off by quickly updating the story from last week where I may or may not have gotten a little heated when we talked about the potential of an in-game advertisement system that was going to be adopted in console gaming. Specifically, Tencent and EA were listed in this. Now, EA has come out since and has said, they're not going to do that. I mean, this is verbatim the line that they gave in response. Following incorrect reports suggesting that we are looking into, I'm going to try this again. Reading is very difficult for me. Following incorrect reports suggesting that we are looking to introduce TV-style commercials into our games, we wanted to clarify that in-game advertising for console games is not something we're currently looking at or have signed any agreements to implement, an EA spokesperson said. Creating the best possible player experience remains our priority focus. Now, you'll remember that I said at the very end of that show last week that even if, this is something that was going to be done very sporadically by just a few people, it's going to happen. This is an inevitability. So EA may be claiming right at this very moment that they are not going to implement something like this into games, which for those who didn't listen to last week's episode, maybe you're coming across the show. Thank you so much for checking us out, by the way. I say us as, there's some person next to me here that, totally doesn't exist. But thanks for checking the podcast out nonetheless. Essentially, there was this technology that seems to be patented where it was going to be giving the offer to players to be able to watch in-game ads on console specifically in order to get things like, currency. Like you see it on mobile games all the time. You'll be playing your gacha game, like if you're a waifu hunter or an anime lover like I am, and you'll get the, if you watch this video, we'll give you 15 coins, and that can go towards maybe, unlocking the next waifu that you'll be able to parade around and have, infinite dreams about, and totally nothing creepy. No, we're nothing creepy. But yeah, it was something that's already been around in mobile games, and it seems like the technology has been patented to do so in console games. And I immediately get my guard up about that because most mobile games that implement these kind of, what's the word I'd like to use for it? Traps, I think would be the word that I like to use, is that mobile games don't charge you anything usually to play their games. You have to pay for currency or pay for packs or whatever else and things of that nature. Whereas on a console game, and specifically one of the games that we all assume would get something like this would be, your Maddens, your FIFAs, your NBAs, your NHLs, basically your EA Sports games, not to mention 2K with obviously NBA being the big cash cow that they're running. You assume that that's going to be the case there because that's the de facto game when it comes to really, really horrendous and downright dangerous, predatory mechanics that these games try to offer in order to get you to spend more money on them. Even though you've already spent your 60, 70, 80, sometimes $100+ on these games, they still want to try to take as much out of you as they can. And EA may try to claim that they have not been looking at it or have signed any agreements to it. Does not mean anything. And keep in mind, too, that they only said console games, which is something that a lot of people are reading into quite a bit as well, because they didn't say PC, which means there's still an opening, which means mobile games are still an opening. I mean, they already exist in most mobile games anyway. But I do not believe for a second that this statement means anything apart from a PR reaction to a story that got kind of leaked out into the aether. Because EA honestly has not shown us any sort of, restraint. I almost said resentment. I'm like, that is, I mean, they hate their customers if they're not paying for them. That's about the most resentment you'll get out of EA. But they have not been one to show a lot of restraint. And it continues to be that way, and more companies have followed suit since because they know that they can get away with it. And my worry would be that something like this would continue, and something like this would absolutely happen. Because why wouldn't they? Of course they would. It's more money in their pockets. Have you seen the kind of money that these higher-ups at EA make? You think they don't want more? I know that we all sit here, I'm making next to nothing. And I'm sitting here being like, man, if I got $1 million in my bank account, I don't know what the hell I do with it. These guys are sitting there with tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions, some of these people. And they're going, which cruise am I going to select this week? Like, they don't care. It's just money in their bank account. They just want more. It's pure greed, simple, plain as can be. And I don't believe for a second that that's true, that they say that they may have not signed anything. I am calling bullshit that it's not something they're currently looking at. Maybe they're not currently looking at it, but believe me, they have salivated at the idea of finding more ways to get more money in their pockets, whether it being through advertisers or, just sucking more money out of the cash cow that is their customers. So I don't believe for a second that that's the case. I think they are looking into something like this. Maybe not this very moment, but they are. Because they're always trying to find a way to make another buck. That's how I kind of see the issue. I mean, you guys are welcome to, comment on the YouTube video, or if you have any way of, I don't remember how every service is for podcasting in terms of audio, if they allow you to comment at all. But if you can't comment, whether it's through the YouTube comments or say Twitter, Instagram, or Gmail account, which is pixelplaypodcast@gmail.com, obviously, let us know what you think about that. But I quite frankly do not believe for a second that this is something that EA would not just love to be able to do. They're probably, if anything, they saw this article and went, that's a really good idea. And now that they've seen how people reacted to it, maybe they just aren't going to do it now because they see the backlash. Which, some people will say, well, how do they not know people are going to backlash about it? They have been trying stuff forever. And sometimes we catch it. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes actually, probably more often than not, we always catch it. It's just sometimes we don't make a big enough of a fuss. Not every game is Star Wars Battlefront 2. It doesn't always go that way because FIFA, Madden, they all exist still. They all exist with the absolutely horrendously predatory microtransactions that they run in those games. But not every game has that. Not every game has that level of ignorance. Sometimes they just fall through the cracks, and sometimes they became these massive stories, and that's what Battlefront 2 was. But it isn't always going to be that way, and we have to keep that in mind. So moving on to the next thing, this is the only other story I really have. Like I said, this is going to be a relatively shorter show. I don't expect this to go too long. I do have a special, kind of fun thing to do at the end of the show for you guys, but the other story is an interesting one, and this kind of hurts my soul as a PlayStation gamer. Kotaku for the last couple of days in the previous week, I should say, it was Wednesday and Thursday, have collectively come out with some not great articles about Sony's storefront. The first one came on Wednesday. Both are written by John Walker, where they commented on the fact that, if you want to get your game noticed on PlayStation, very visibly, up there on the storefronts, maybe easier to find, because look, I'm a Sony gamer. I can flat out admit the PlayStation Store sucks. I'm so annoyed that PS5, for everything that I love about that console, the storefront is an absolute dumpster fire. I hate it. trying to find games. I can't even find demos for the game. I recently wanted to get the demo for Chaos, the Final Fantasy game, or, the Final Fantasy Origin game, and it took me having to literally search it manually to find it. There's no demo section. It's not in the free game section where it usually is on the PlayStation 4 storefront. And, that was a pain in the ass. And now if you want to find anything, like, all at once in a blue moon, go into the newest section and just scroll down and see what's there. That's the best option that I have. And sometimes that still falls through the cracks. A lot of the times when it comes to indie games, I have to know through articles, I have to know through YouTube videos, I have to know through reviews and all that to find out what the big game in town is for the current month, what's going on. And not to mention, there's other ways to find it too. Like Steam has been a big part of that for the indie scene. Xbox Game Pass helps a lot with that. Sometimes there's the diamond in the rough you get on PlayStation Plus, but that isn't always the case. So the initial article was saying, hey, there's a $25,000 fee if you want to get some better visibility when it comes to your storefront. And if you're an indie game publisher, that's a lot of money. That's probably nothing you can do. And I saw that article and went, that is insane. I don't understand. Like, unless it's literally front page, I guess I can understand it. But even then, I'm still like, dude, that's really ridiculous. For $25,000? And, man, that's just weird. Because, like, if your game is really good, shouldn't just the traction, like the traffic of that game, would that not determine whether or not it gets put up on the front? Like, if I was Sony, I'm thinking, well, if game sales are high for this game, I want to put it on the front because it's going to make us more money. Whereas it seems if you even want to get a chance at being seen so you can even start that train, you got to put some money up front. And that seems a little bit backwards. But the follow-up, the following day, because a lot of people reacted. So this is verbatim from Kotaku's Thursday article, which is PlayStation is hard to work with, devs say, again, written by John Walker. The one line that stands out right at the very beginning is there were two main responses to our article yesterday, highlighting one independent developer's frustrations with working with Sony to sell games on the PlayStation Store. This was referring to the $25,000 fee that was required to pay. The first was a confusing number of people convinced that this was somehow part of an underground conspiracy to destroy Sony. Lol, console war. I could go on forever about why I hate the fact that people think that, because you say something mean about a company that makes the console that they're currently playing on, you have to outright defend them. I'll say this again and again. I am a Sony owner. I play and own a PlayStation 5, and yeah, I do have a vested interest in what they're doing. But if something is bad on their end, I'm not going to hide that. I will end up giving some bias to Sony because, again, that's where my knowledge is. Like, I would love to be a Nintendo fanboy. Maybe. But I don't own the console. I haven't played any of their games in quite some time. I don't have the immediate Jesus, English is a difficult language sometimes, folks. Attraction and attachment to, the console itself, to the company. So I do have a bit of favoritism to Sony because I play them, but I'm not going to hide when they do something that I don't think is right. And obviously, it seems that if you're an independent developer for Sony, it just doesn't work. And people seem to jump at that. I try not to. So to finish off that paragraph, the second was many indie game developers and publishers getting in touch to say that yes, wow, Sony are far harder to work with and sell games through anywhere else. It's not possible to rationalize with the former group. We had confirmed hard figures on Sony's fees for getting invisibility on the PlayStation's inbuilt store, so we reported them. The conspiracy disappointingly ends there. However, the information about just how much worse it is for indies to work with Sony than Microsoft or Nintendo keeps piling in. So a lot of these were anonymous. A lot of this was people that reached out to Kotaku, so I'm not going to take these with the utmost of validity, but I'm also not going to take them with a grain of salt. But just keep in mind that most of these we don't have a name attached to, so we can't verify for sure if this is an actual developer or if this is just some person who just, has it out for Sony and wants to take a shot at it. I can't, tell you either way. One such response had, oh yeah, so there's Nintendo who supports you, then Microsoft who supports you, and then there's Sony who supports its own AAA machine and gives a fuck about everyone else. Uh, we know that Sony, their concentration is on their big AAA games because that is their moneymaker. I'm not going to pretend that their indie scene is thriving. I think that they do an okay job at promoting a few independent titles, although some of them tend to be under Sony's banner anyway. But I think that they don't outright ignore indie. I don't think they do the best job, but I think we have to also keep in mind, and I'm trying not to be a defense lawyer for Sony right now, but Sony's bread and butter right now is not on independent gaming, or sorry, on indie gaming. It should be. I'd love it to be because a lot of great stuff comes out of the indie scene. But generally speaking, I think the way that Sony's strategy with indie games are is that if you are deep enough into the indie scene, you don't need them to tell you because most of you are familiar with what goes on with Steam. Most of you are familiar with, like, say, what YouTubers are saying about it, what other sites are saying about these indie games. And generally speaking, most really popular indie games, you know, if they're going to get any traction on consoles, it's going to be through already previously, you know, well-known PR that's been done to it. Like, everybody knows about this game already, so of course they'll get it on a console as well. Like, your Enter the Gungeons, your Fall Guys, you know, those games exist because they already did pretty well. Actually, Fall Guys is a weird example because they also were free the first month they were out. But Enter the Gungeon, for example, would be one. So it isn't always the case. I don't want to pretend that Sony is probably not being the greatest with indie developers. And this is probably more to do with smaller indie devs. I don't think if you're like Supergiant or other companies, I don't think you're having nearly as difficult a time because you have the track record. But if you're an indie developer trying to get started, trying to get their game out there, you know, it maybe is a little bit more difficult. Now, at the same time, keep in mind that it isn't always easy too. Like, there's a lot of really horrendously bad games on Sony's digital front, in the same vein that Steam is the same way. I'm sure Nintendo and Xbox are the exact same way. I have played at one point some very weird, like, I used to go through the demo section just to try everything. There is some really, really low quality stuff that kind of gets just buried in the PlayStation Store. And it's like that everywhere else. So no, I'm not going to assume that every case is like this indie gem that isn't getting to have its, you know, chance to shine. Whereas it might just be games that really weren't going to make a dent anyway, and they're just a little bit salty because they had to pay a fee, which I don't agree with. But at the same time, I want to keep that part in mind, that not every game that we're talking about potentially, because these, again, are all anonymous comments. We don't know if this is a spokesperson for, like, Supergiant, like I said, or some really big indie company. It could be a guy who has sold 20 copies of their game that they made on their own, which, believe me, I envy you guys that can do that stuff because I do not have the drive to put that much work for that long. And I know it sucks that you don't get to see the fruits of your labor because no one either knows it's on the store or it just doesn't seem to work out. So I'm in both camps in this, but we'll keep reading quotes. So this is another independent, anonymous one. Sony doesn't understand what indie means. Not at all. For them, indie is something in the lower million budgets. Another one says, no platform is great, but Sony is particularly terrible. They know it too. They've had a problem for a long time, and they've been telling devs they have a problem for a long time, but they've just never fixed anything, so the problem persists. Another one, we get people every week saying, saw your game on the Xbox dashboard today. The Xbox UI feels like a mess, but in reality it's actually kind of interesting that they just have so many different places to feature games. Sony obviously seems to not be that. On Switch, there's a indie thing, or an indie developer, again, another anonymous comment saying, without paying for featuring, there are spots on the eShop you will appear without paying. New releases, great deals, all those kinds of lists, and they will put new releases and decent discounts into the Discover tab too. There was also a few people that show like pie charts of how their sales went across consoles. Whitethorn Games was publishing one that showed Switch made up 60%, Xbox 30%, Steam 7%, PlayStation 3%. Those Awesome Guys, another indie developer, showed 91.5% on Steam, 7.6% on Switch, 0.6% on Xbox, 0.3% on PlayStation. Another one said the exact sales figures for one release they had Sold around 20,000 on Xbox compared to 7,000 on PlayStation. However, on DLC, the Microsoft console shifted 2,000 units of its DLC and Sony only 7. Now, numerically, I know a lot of people will see these numbers and automatically go, oh, wow, Sony just doesn't seem to do much for it. I don't know if we can automatically say that it's, them not choosing to put stuff on there. I don't have any proof on it. These are just numbers. And believe me, if there was all this stuff that said, oh yeah, Sony just goes out of their way to just not show indie games, sure. I can kind of believe that anyway, because again, finding games can sometimes be hard, but it's a really difficult thing for me to comment on personally because again, I suppose it doesn't help for me personally because I don't deep dive for indie games very often. I'm generally speaking a long form like JRPG or open world game. I'm trying to get just a couple of games that take a bunch of time out because I don't have nearly as much time as I used to. And I'm trying not to spend a lot of money either because I ain't making millions. So it's a difficult thing for me to personally see. I don't know, without knowing which games these are. If I found it that's, let's say, I'm trying to pull a game out of my ass here. Let's say is it the Swords of Ditto? I think it's the Swords of Ditto. Let's say if they came out and said, oh, by the way, on Steam, we sold this game for, let's say, about 50,000 copies. Switch, we did about 20,000. Xbox, we did about 15,000. PlayStation, we did about 2,000. Yeah, that's a little weird. That would be a little bit strange. But I mean, again, the examples that we're getting are just one or two. And they can say that, oh, there's a bunch of them and whatever else, but I don't know if this is necessarily a PlayStation problem or if maybe just the game doesn't seem to do very well on that console. Because again, keep in mind, what's the bread and butter of this console right now? It's its big AAA library. And it's very easy for people to get lost in that. It's easy for people, by the way, and I'm not trying to take a shot at Nintendo, but look, I'm just going to say it. It's really easy for people on Nintendo to find indie games because there's nothing releasing on that console of high AAA quality. If Nintendo has a game a month, 2 games a month of major high quality coming out on their console, then maybe indie games die down a little bit because people are too busy buying the bigger games on that console. But it doesn't. It isn't like that. I mean, we're sitting here with Mario Golf already being, kind of shot into the air by a lot of people just not happy with it. And it's very easy for indie games to go because, not to mention, it's like a portable device. So indie games kind of work really well on those consoles. I mean, one of my best friends, he loves playing games on Switch and does it a lot. So he usually will buy a game on Steam and sometimes also buy a copy on Switch and just kind of mess around with it there. And it works out really well for him that way. I think Switch is actually a pretty decent console for indie games because of its portability. But again, I'm also going to go back to, I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty sure a large portion of indie sales happen because there's nothing else on the store. So it's easier for games to get pushed to the top because there's not much else they're competing with once you get past the 6 months of everybody buying the one big game. Your Zeldas, your Marios, your Donkey Kongs, your Metroid. Well, I guess most of these aren't happening right now. But all the big games, Breath of the Wild might be a big deal on the store, but once everybody starts buying it, something else has to climb in that place. Whereas with Sony, there is a lot on that console that gets released. I know that it doesn't feel that way because we've been in a couple of years of pandemic gaming releases, but keep in mind that in the heyday of PlayStation 4, when things were at its busiest, it was so easy to get lost in that storefront, even with the PlayStation 4 storefront being a lot better. So I'm going to say this to end this entire article, that I do believe that Sony is probably not doing the best job at taking care of indie developers a little bit better. I mean, the $25,000 fee is ridiculous to me. I hate that. I think that's insane. But when it comes to stories like what I'm hearing, they're hard to work with, I'm assuming that every publisher, every console is going to be somewhat hard to work with because they want their cut, they want their money, so they're going to be pretty specific on what they want. Now, I know in some cases, I think Steam at one point used to be the easiest thing to do, and it's probably still is because, Steam, it's impossible to figure out what you want to do with Steam games. There's so much. But I think with with Xbox and PlayStation specifically, because these are the two big game consoles, they have a lot of AAA releases. I think it's easier for games to be lost in there. I mean, we saw with some of those stats, like Switch does really well, Steam does really well, Xbox and PlayStation, sometimes not so much. Now, the few examples that we got seems to paint PlayStation in a really bad light, but without knowing what games they are, I can't tell you if it's a game that maybe actually didn't deserve the sales on PlayStation. Like, I don't know. So to take everything as it is, I mean, simply put, I don't like the idea of Sony possibly making it very difficult for indies to get their games on their storefront and to get any traction on their storefront. But I'm also not going to sit here and tell you that this is something that grossly affects me and I hate and it needs to be ended immediately because I want my indie games. Because flat out, I don't play nearly as many indie games as I probably should. But based on the kind of games that I play, I don't generally have as much time to take a risk on a game that I don't really know much about. So for me personally, it's not the easiest thing for me to comment on because I don't have the bias to lean in the favor of the independent publishers because I don't have all these horses in that race. I'm more just on the back end being like, okay, well, if Sony's treating them badly, okay, Sony, treat them better. That's the best I can give. Sony, if you're actually treating independent developers horribly, this is an easy fix. You have the money to. Don't kid ourselves on this. We know you have the money to do it. Look at all the money you're making off of all your games. You can do a little bit of a better job. And most importantly, fix the frickin' PS5 storefront. It's horrible. Solve that problem first, and I think some of the visibility errors can be corrected already with that. And then on top of that, get rid of your stupid-ass fee. Unless you're trying to... if you have never heard of this developer before, and you're just doing hey, we don't just want to throw this thing on, the main page because we don't have a clue on what your game is going to be. Well, I mean, the problem would be obviously solved if somebody tested all these games beforehand to see if they were worth putting on the storefront, but we know a lot of these things don't. So there's that. There are a lot of fixes that could be done. The simplest thing is get rid of the fee and, just be a little bit more open. And I think we're getting to the point now that as we get further into this cycle of this console generation, that we start to see if Sony is going to become the asshole that Xbox decided to be in the previous generation when they wanted to just block everything off because they thought they had it won. And that's the worry that I'm getting here. Stories like this make me wonder if Sony is becoming the villain again because they won so easily in the last generation. And I hope that stories like this don't keep coming because it's going to make me as a PlayStation owner feel like, oh crap, the drought's coming and I made a poor, decision in buying this console over a different one. Now I have Game Pass on PC, so, at the very least, I'm not missing out on too much, so I'm not freaking out as much as I would have if I had bought the Xbox One instead of the PS4. So, me personally, I'm not worried about it nearly as much, but I'm not liking the direction we're going in so far. But yeah, let us know in the comments below what you think about that. Obviously, Sony with what's going on, it's a tough issue. I'm trying so hard not to let my bias take over here, but there is an honest part of me that's I don't particularly care too much about this because it doesn't really affect me, but it still goes down to that, okay, if we're charging a $25,000 fee, that's pretty ridiculous. Can we at least stop that? That's really dumb. But otherwise, I don't know, without knowing what games we're talking about in the indie scene, I can't tell you whether these are complaints that are deserved, because if the game might be really bad, I don't really want it visible either, because I've played a couple of demos, like I said, on the PlayStation Store for indie games that I'm man, this doesn't even deserve to be on the storefront. I really hope this doesn't get pushed at all because I don't want people to be buying these. But that's a whole nother story. So yeah, let me know what you think in that. So I got a couple of fun things left. I'm going to give you an Untimely review. The reason I'm giving you this, I actually have 3 reviews I could do today, but I want to save 2 of them because Kaylan doesn't hurt them. So to pull back the curtain a little bit on last week, you may have noticed in the video version an edit, because at some point it was so hot in my room here that I'm recording in that I had the fan on. So I was constantly muting my mic over and over and unmuting it to, try to hide the fan noise as best as I could. And at one point during Kaylan's review of Ratchet and Clank, I happened to turn off my mic and forget to turn it back on, so we had to do that. And during that entire conversation, I reviewed Monster Hunter, the movie that was on Amazon, which I will do shortly here. But during that case, we had a lot of issues, and we just decided that because we didn't have a lot of time left to record, because we're pretty strapped for time already when we do record on Tuesdays, we just quickly did the Ratchet review again, and then that was it. And we figured we'd do the Monster Hunter thing another time. Now, he's already heard my review of it, so it's not going to hurt his feelings if I do it here again, and that's what I'm going to do as some level of content that I can give you guys, apart from the 2 stories that I've commented, because to be completely honest, there isn't really much else to talk about. So the first of 2 fun things, Monster Hunter, the Untimely review. I guess this is somewhat timely. I mean, it came out somewhat recently. So I knew from the moment that I saw screenshots and the initial trailer to this movie that it was going to be bad. I didn't know what kind of bad, because I had a feeling that Mortal Kombat would be bad, but I thought it would be a fun kind of bad like the original Mortal Kombat was. And I was right for the most part, minus a few story things in the second half of that movie that I don't like. Monster Hunter, I wasn't sure if it was going to be a fun bad or a just overall bad. And I came out of that movie going, I can't get that time back. And that's about all you need to know about Monster Hunter, but I'm going to continue more into it. I don't think Milla Jovovich did a bad job in the movie. I mean, I really love Milla Jovovich. I love her. You know, I've watched Fifth Element, Ultraviolet, Resident Evil movies. She's done some pretty fun bad stuff, and I've enjoyed quite a lot of it. And Monster Hunter, I sat there thinking, okay, I already don't like the fact that Hollywood, because, they like to get their hands on everything, that they got to put some sort of reality into it. So they're like, oh, the military fell into a portal and ended up in the Monster Hunter world. You couldn't just make a movie where you're in the Monster Hunter world and you get to see the journey of a bunch of hunters trying to get their way in the world. You couldn't just do that. You couldn't have a story about how this kid, his dad was killed by an Anjanath or Rathalos or whatever, or Nergigante. You couldn't have some crazy story or not crazy, some simple freaking basic shit story like that. No, you had to go the portal route because you need to get your military hoorah stuff in there. And the first 15 minutes is a waste of time because of that. The first 10 to 15 minutes of the movie is just introducing you to a bunch of people, not including Milla Jovovich. She's there, but she's just whatever at this point. A bunch of military people that end up dying really goddamn quick in this movie, and they got to do some moment where they sing some military songs as they drive into the sands of the middle of buttfuck nowhere. And that's the first 10 minutes of the movie, and I'm already sitting here being like, okay, what are you doing with this? And then portal opens, they fall, they get attacked by Diablos, kills a couple of people, end up in a cave, spiders come out, kill a couple more people, and then you're just left to Milla Jovovich and a hunter from the actual world that they're in. And, I guess I'm spoiling some stuff here by saying a couple, all the military people except Milla Jovovich die, but let's be honest, I don't care. And I don't think you'll care when they die because they don't matter, because you get no time to really be interested in these people. That's why I'm like, dude, if you just started the movie in the world already and stuck with the hunters, because they did. They started a very, very brief moment with a couple of characters that you do see come back eventually, getting attacked by a few monsters. And you're thinking, oh, that's a cool start to the movie. And then you forget, oh, yeah, the military stuff. And that's when they roll that in. If they just started with the hunter stuff leading into the story of the guy overcoming after that attack, that could have been an okay movie. But they had to put their Hollywood glitz part to it, and they brought in the military stuff, and everything just went downhill from there. So without spoiling the rest of the movie, Milla Jovovich is fine. The hunter guy is okay, although the problem is that movie is basically centered around one girl who can speak English and one guy who can't. That's most of the movie. As soon as the military goons are all gone, it's her and a guy who can't speak English. It's really, really dull and boring for a long part of the movie. And some really dumb shit happens when these two kind of come into contact. That, again, I'm not going to spoil, because if you want to have to deal with the suffering, you got to go and do that yourself. I'm not going to get you out of this. Or I guess you can just Wikipedia the damn movie and see it quickly. But the entire middle of the movie sucks. Absolutely sucks. The CG is really good. That's the good thing I'll say about the movie is the CG is fantastic. I love how it looks. I wish that Monster Hunter could have been a good movie with that look, because that could have been quite interesting. but the middle in terms of like its pacing and the storytelling that it was trying to do and the dialogue, it's horrible. I almost wanted to turn the movie off, but I knew it was that deep in, I might as well finish. It finally gets to the point where Diablos is one of the two monsters, because Diablos and Rathalos are the two biggies in this. Diablos gets dealt with, they move on to Rathalos, things pick up a little bit, and then it ends just like that, without even really any warning. Like, I watched the time, like, when they finally get to Rathalos, I'm looking at how much time's left in the movie, and it's also including the credits. And I looked at my girlfriend who was watching it with me and be like, I don't know what the hell they're going to do here. There's no time. Rathalos is a big deal. They're going to this is either going to kill him off in 2 minutes, or, like, they're going to have this weird-ass cliffhanger. And again, without spoiling it, they didn't do something good with it. I can give you that much. I didn't really enjoy much of that. And the ending clearly opened it up to the possibility of doing more, and I really hope they don't, because, God, everything about it is horrible apart from the CG. Like, the acting is mostly bad. Like, Ron Perlman tried his ass off to save it, but he looks horrible. I don't know what they did with his makeup in this movie, but it looks horrible. He's in there for a couple of minutes, and I wish he wasn't there at all, because I feel like that's just something that, like, I hope he got a nice paycheck, because Lord knows that was a waste of his talent. Milla Jovovich did the best she could in a really, really bad movie, and sometimes she can overcome it, and sometimes she doesn't, and this is one of the times where she didn't. I didn't like her very much in this. The monsters did their best. There was one moment in this movie that I actually, like, said, okay, I can deal with this movie now just for this moment. They do, like, anybody who's played Monster Hunter World knows the scene every time you cook something when the Palicos get to cook something. The cat people. They do the Palico cooking scene briefly, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll accept this as, like, the one thing about this movie I'll like apart from the CG. Okay, fine, I'll take that. And that's it. CG is really nice, and the Palico cooking scene. That's about all the nice things I can say about this movie. Otherwise, the beginning, in terms of the military stuff, was a waste of time. They wasted so much valuable time doing that. The middle of the point where the hunter and Milla Jovovich's character interact for the first few little bit sucks. Makes no sense and doesn't move anything forward. The fact that they save Rathalos for the last, like, 10 minutes of the movie is horrendous. Shows just that the people who were working with this really didn't know what the hell they were doing. They did, like, I can't even explain to you how badly they dealt with the lore. Like, oh my God, they turned it into a mystical, like, magic adventure with a portal that was suddenly, like, putting people in and out of dimensions and shit. I'm like, dude, Monster Hunter is basically the simplest concept you have. You are a person, you hunt big creatures, you take their skin, and you make weapons and armor out of it. That's it. And they basically didn't touch it. Like, and by the way, I guess the other thing that I have, the military is using tank rifles and RPGs, and it doesn't do anything against Diablos. But a twin blade made out of, I guess, a spider fang, cuts through everything. No, I'm not accepting that. Not accepting that at all. So, all in all, Monster Hunter is a 1.5 star at best movie. The Palico and the CG might be the only thing giving it that half star. I really implore you guys to not watch that film. Unless you want to literally watch a horrible movie and you intended to. I kind of went in knowing that. So I didn't leave disappointed. I just left like, I'm so glad I'm not really attached to Monster Hunter. Like, I really have just played Monster Hunter World and that's it. But I'm still kind of annoyed because I really like Monster Hunter World and I was hoping that they would do something cool when I heard the first time that they were going to do a Monster Hunter movie. But again, Hollywood ruins everything like they always do with video game movies. It seems like every time we get a Sonic the Hedgehog or a Detective Pikachu, there's a Monster Hunter. And I guess there's a Mortal Kombat because, again, the Hollywood story part of it, they had to get Cole Young in there. Even though the fighting in CG was really good, they always got to ruin it somehow. They can't just go with the lore and let people who actually like the thing they're making do it. But again, not everybody can be Marvel either. Sorry, DC. So, with that jab over with, one last thing I wanted to do as like a fun thing, because I knew I was going to have a little bit of time left. I'm actually at 40 minutes, which Well, okay, it's saying we're 40 minutes. I did probably pause for a little bit to start the intro, so it's probably close to 40. So I'm actually surprised I got this far, but then again, I knew that I could rant if I really had to. So I'm going to do a fun little thing for you guys where I'm just going to give you a top 5. You know, I am the biggest JRPG fan, and we have talked about Final Fantasy before on the show about how Final Fantasy 16 is making me so worried that I might have to quit Square Enix entirely over it. I figured it'd be, you know what, let's have some fun. Let's do a top 5 Final Fantasy games for me personally. So I am not, when I say this top 5, I am not saying these are the best Final Fantasy games, period. I'm saying these are my top 5 Final Fantasies. So if your favorites aren't included in this top 5, I'm not sorry. You were warned. This is my personal favorite. Whatever you put on the pedestal is what you get to do, and you're welcome to slag me like a son of a bitch in the comments below or through our Gmail account, pixelplaypodcast@gmail.com, pixelplaycast on Twitter and Instagram. Do whatever you want. Lash me out. I don't care. These are my top 5. So, starting at number 5, some people are going to be like, really? That's your top 5? But yeah, it is. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. I didn't play the original Tactics. I wish I had. I still could if I wanted to. I have a really weird thing. Like, I love Chrono Cross, for example. One of my favorite games from that era. I have a really hard time going back and playing the game just because of how it looks. I don't know what it is about visuals, but like, as soon as I see the blocky textures and stuff, it just kind of takes me out. I think because I've already finished them, it also makes it easier for me to be like, do I really want to go through this again? Whereas, you know, I think with Tactics, it really just comes back down to, like, I would love to go back and play it because I never have, but like, I don't know. There's no incentive for me to do it. And it sucks because I'd love to. It's just one of those things where it's like, man, I just can't get myself to do it. Don't know why. It's one of those things where it doesn't work. But Tactics Advance, on the other hand, I played the hell out of that game. Played that a crap ton. And it's one of those few games that when I was younger that like sometimes you listen to music when you play games. I do that sometimes depending on the kind of game. This was a game that I did a lot to. And the song that I associate the most, which also makes me a little bit sad thinking about it now, is Linkin Park's Numb. Don't ask me why that song specifically to this game. It's just because that was like the hit at that time, and I listened to that song a lot. I like that song. Meteora is one of my favorite records still to this day. But like, anytime I see footage of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, I immediately have Linkin Park in my head. It's just how it kind of works. But like, from playing this game, it really makes me want to go and play Tactics. But again, I just, for some reason, can't get myself to. I need to go back and play Advance, honestly. That's what I should be doing. But like, I love a good strategy game. I mean, I've tried other games like XCOM does really well. Mario Rabbids, when I got to play that at a friend's place, I really liked a lot. Oddly enough, I tried Fell Seal and for some reason couldn't get into it. I can't really tell you why. I'm not really sure why, actually. So it's just one of those times that I guess it just didn't work out the way that it wanted to. But that one didn't work. But generally speaking, like Fire Emblem works really well. Like Fire Emblem Awakening, I really love too. So all of these kind of strategy games, turn-based strategy games, I really like a lot. I guess the art style for Tactics Advance really grew on me. I like that sort of anime-ish art style. I guess it's a big part of it. And it is a very chill game that you can kind of like just have a good old time with, play a couple of rounds with, and just be over and done with it. Really enjoyed it a lot. There's going to be a lot of games on this list that people are going to still look at and be like, man, you really put that above X or X or X or X or X. Like, no, it's for whatever reason that has a lot of extra like nostalgia to me, whereas some other ones just don't seem to do it the same way. But yeah, that's going to be number 5 for me. Number 4, I've recently finally taken a good stab at, and that's Final Fantasy 14. I really struggled with 11, really did, and it sucks because I really, really, really love Final Fantasy. And when I played 11 for the first time, I thought, oh man, it's a Final Fantasy game I can play online with friends. That sounds so cool. And then I play it and go, this is so boring. I generally struggle with MMOs as well. Like the only ones that I really spent a good chunk of time with was Guild Wars and Final Fantasy 14. And those have been in free games. I tried WoW, didn't really get into it much. Old Republic, didn't really get into it much. Phantasy Star Online 2, I wanted to love so bad. Maybe the new one they're coming out with. Can't think of the name of it right now. But PSO2, I enjoyed it for a little bit, and then it just started getting like away from me. 14, I have now played 2 separate full month trials of, and I'm now have a permanent. Now that I finally figured out that my PC version is fine, I bought it way back in the day on PS4 for some reason and never played it, and I guess I forgot. So when I tried to activate a free trial on there, it was still only 30 days because it registered the game, and I guess if you buy it on the store for money, it just doesn't make it a free game anymore. I don't know. It was really weird how that worked out. But either way, like I've played 2 full 30-day trials with it. I've gotten pretty far. I think it was like level like mid to late 30s as a ninja both times. And I really enjoy the game. It's a great time sink. Like I love games that I can just kind of play and just run around in and not do much, especially for podcasts. I love playing games that I can listen to podcasts to, so that helped a lot. But yeah, that is my number 4. I need to get back into it again. I actually tried to stream it a little bit, and the problem is, A, it's really hot in here now that it's in the summer. I don't have AC. And B, I generally try to play it when I have a lot of stuff to talk about, because I don't have a lot of people that watch my streams usually, so it's really hard to interact with nobody. And I know that people do it all the time where they can talk for hours about random stuff. I don't like just bringing up random things. I try to have either things to talk about or I try to interact with people. And there's only so many things I can bring up in like a 2 to 3 hour stream. So it's hard to get those together. So I haven't really gotten a chance to go back to it with the actual proper permanent free trial that I have. But I definitely need to get back into it, and I absolutely will at some point. Number 3, now we get to the good stuff. Final Fantasy IV, Super Nintendo. I love that game. Oh man, do I love that game. The first Final Fantasy I ever played. And man, there is so much about that game that I miss. And I've gone back and played it a bunch. I wish I could do it more. And the Pixel remaster has me worried. I really wonder if like I'll go back and play those games and be like, man, I don't know, I just don't feel it anymore. I have gone back and beaten 6, which I'll get into shortly. But 4 is one of those weird ones that like, I think the last time I finished it would have been, it's in at least a decade, I would say. But there's still a lot about that game that I like a lot. The nostalgia factor is a big part of it. The music is fantastic in that game. And again, the Super Nintendo games, I'll say this with 6 as well when I get to 6. I guess I'm spoiling what one of my last 2 are. But the Super Nintendo JRPGs to me are timeless. I could still play them today like they were indie games. If I had never played a Final Fantasy game before and you threw 7, or not 7, Jesus. If you threw 4, 5, or 6 at me, I'd be like, man, these are really good. Like, who made this? I'd be like, Square. I'm like, when did Square come out with this? Oh, this is like a 20-year-old game. What? If I never would have known, because these games are just, the visual style has evolved to almost being like the exact same as a lot of indie games are now. The characters I really love in this game, like Cecil, Rydia, Kane, obviously, a lot of people love Kane. I even love Golbez as a villain until they kind of screwed that up and did the whole, lol, this is actually the guy who's been running it in the last like hour of the game. But, you know, that's apparently JRPGs love to do that. I don't know why, but that's the thing they love to do. They really did some cool things with stakes. I mean, I guess I'm going to spoil a lot of stuff with this game, but I mean, this game's like 20 plus years old. What do you want? The fact that there were actual people that die in this game, like Tella dies in this game, Palom and Porum were supposed to, and they didn't. They pull a lot of the just kidding, they're not dead things, like Yang almost dies at least once. Sid, I think, dies almost twice. Like, it happens a lot where people just kind of, instead of, because you only run with a 5-person party, I think, through most of the game. So a lot of the times they have to find ways to write people out. Like, for example, very early on, Yang falls out of a ship because of Leviathan, so you lose him and Rydia for a while, and you end up in a completely different area with a different party. Like, all that stuff happens. So they found some weird ways to write people out. And most of the time it's meh, like it could have been better. There are a few that's just like, wow, okay. But like overall, I really still love a lot about the game. I know that it sounds like I'm bitching a lot about this game because of some of the stuff it does, but you know, I bitch about almost every game because it's easier to find stuff that you hate. Because whenever you say something about things that you like, you're just like, oh man, it's just so awesome, you gotta play it. Sometimes it's not always as easy to talk about all the things you really love. But yeah, I absolutely adore that game. Number 2 is where we talk about Final Fantasy X. I I've gone back recently because I've said for the longest time that 10 is my personal favorite and 6 is the best. It's now reversed. 6 is my favorite game and 10 is my second. Only because now that I've played 10 a little bit more, I have to admit that the story in the second half is horrible. It is horrible. The fact that, like, the entire time, again, going to be spoiling a game that's over 20 years old. I think it's going to be 20 at the end of this year. I think it was October, November this year, or this year it'll be 20 years. The first half of the game is you getting teleported into this world, it seemed, 1,000 years into the future. It's your world, but 1,000 years in the future, where this monster that you saw wreck your city has been wrecking the world for a millennia. And it's completely wrecked to the point that machines don't exist anymore. It's like we've regressed back to, the days of wooden huts and like stone buildings. And you're trying to get back home, or trying to figure out what the hell you're doing, or trying to find like any way to belong in this world. And then you get to the second half of the game where it turns out, lol, just kidding, the monster is actually your dad. And by the way, you're just a dream. You're actually going to fade away once you get rid of sin. The big baddie is actually this really weird, like, firefly projection. Because again, we got to do the lol, just kidding. This is the real power behind all of it. I've really gone back and played the game, and the second half is so disappointing that as much as there is so much love, I love the soundtrack to that game. I love the visuals of that game. Blitzball, I wish to this day that they made a Blitzball game. I wish I could buy an actual Blitzball. I love that part of the game. My girlfriend's actually playing it for the first time. She has just got to Luca. I cannot wait to go back and play Blitzball to help get her through that final match. And, man, I love so much about that game, but I cannot without a critical eye go, man, even for all the things I love about it, just that one thing that sticks out like a sore thumb just doesn't quite do it. Which brings us then to the number one of Final Fantasy VI. Because like I said, there are a lot of things that I don't like about Final Fantasy X in the end. 6, I do not have that problem. That problem does not exist. It's great. I love it. Everything about it. Quite possibly one of the best soundtracks ever in a video game. Almost one of the best. Quite possibly the best villain in a video game I've ever played. Kefka, as we're seeing on the screen right now, not even intentional that it happened if you're watching the video version. Kefka is one of the best villains ever, certainly the best Final Fantasy villain ever. I know some people might have some arguments. I'm not really willing to hear them. Okay, fine. In the comments below you can say it, but I probably will say, no, lol, you're wrong. But everything about this game is so well done. The only honest complaint that I can have about it is that because the cast of party members is so big, some of them just fall through the cracks and don't get the best showing. But like, for every Umaro or Mog, there is Edgar, there's Sabin, there's Terra, there's Locke, there's Celis. There's so many that do incredible. And the story has a lot of moments. One where the villain gets to win. And you get to see some horrifying stuff. I still kind of have a bit of a scar from watching the Earth split and seeing, if I'm not mistaken, adults and children fall to their deaths. Some pretty horrifying stuff. And having the old battle system, the old school ATB, granted, some of the abilities become useless when you start teaching magic to everybody. I guess that's my second complaint. Just the fact that, eventually you just teach all your party members Ultima and then you stop using their abilities. I try not to do that because I know it's more fun to, not do the same thing over and over again. So I just do what I normally do in JRPGs, which is level up way too much. So that way I can have a little bit of fun. But everything about this game is basically perfect. The battle system is at its best. Music is amazing. Story is incredible. I know some people have a little bit of a weird issue with some of the parts of the story. I can forgive most of any of the little things they do wrong. The villains are great. Party members, for the most part, are great. Again, like I said with Final Fantasy IV, it looks pretty timeless. I could still play it today. Makes me worry about the pixel remaster a little bit because I've seen what the new Terra looks like. I think it looks a little more bland now, which is mostly what my complaints of the new pixel representations of the characters are. But like everything about 6, the original game is so good. Now, I would suggest if you can, try to play the SNES version. If you even have to use an emulator, I guess do it that way. Don't touch the mobile versions of 4 and 6. Please, for the love of God, for your own sanity, don't touch it because it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. The PC versions are a little bit weird. The PlayStation versions were really weird with loading times because apparently the PlayStation couldn't handle a Super Nintendo game. So, yeah, like 4 and 6 are guaranteed. Like you cannot go wrong with those. 10, I will tell most people, is a nostalgia thing for why I put it up there. 14, if you have any interest in MMORPG, get the free trial, go have fun with that. It is, even solo, it can be a nice time sink. If you want a chill game or a game that you like play with like music on, podcast, radio, like whatever you want, do it there. And then Tactics Advance is just kind of like me going, oh man, I wish I could go back and like just play a good old school like strategy RPG because I love to play Fire Emblem Three Houses, but alas, I can't. Maybe Metal Slug Tactics will do that for me. That's actually a possibility. So that's something I get to look to down the road. But anyways, that is my top 5. So 5, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. 4, Final Fantasy 14. 3, Final Fantasy 4. 2, Final Fantasy X, 10, whatever you want to call it. And at number 1, as it's just recently changed, Final Fantasy VI is my favorite Final Fantasy of all time. My personal top 5. And if you're sitting there being like, well, how's 7 not on there? I haven't played the remake yet. I played the demo and I thought it was really good, so who knows? Maybe sometime down the road, if I ever do this list again, it bumps Tactics out. You know, you never know. But that is going to do it for this episode. So again, Kaylan should be back next week. Assuming this even makes air, because again, may still end up recording tomorrow. I just recorded this as an emergency thing, just in the odd case. Also, it's cooler here today on a Monday than it's going to be tomorrow because the heat's going to get worse here, so that'll be fun. But yeah, thanks for checking us out on this show. We actually went basically an hour. I always say I think this is going to be a shorter show, and it never ends up being that way. I really should learn, and I never do. But, like I said, thank you so much for checking us out. So if you did enjoy this podcast, thank you so much for checking us out. So, if you want to get at us, pixelplaypodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us. On Twitter or Instagram, pixelplaycast. If you want to check us out on YouTube, if you're listening to an audio form, youtube.com. You'll have to search Pixel Play Podcast because we still don't get to have a custom link because we haven't hit that threshold that it lets us do so. But just search a Pixel Play Podcast. You'll find us pretty quickly. And if you're watching us on YouTube and you want to catch us on an audio service, we are available on most audio platforms that you get your podcast, whether that be Apple, Google, Spotify, many, many more. Stitcher is the weird one that we're not on yet because Stitcher is weird like that. But also, if you want a full listing of everything that we're on, you can go to anchor.fm/pixelplaycast and you'll be able to see all the platforms that we are available on. Maybe it's on the platform that you like to use the most. But yes, that is it for this show. Thank you so much for checking us out, guys. This has been the Pixel Play Podcast, and we will see you guys on the next episode where, unfortunately, I will not be solo. I will have to accept my bad takes again there. But alas, as they say in Final Fantasy X, no matter how dark the night, morning always comes, and our journey begins anew. So, see you guys next week. I'm Adam, aka CSRadical. Have a good one, everybody, and go play some Final Fantasy, man. Let's go. Bye for now.